Pastor Stump here with episode 4 of Bible 101. We're going to talk about the next section of the Hebrew Bible, or what many people call the Old Testament today. And again, I'm going to be referring to this from what the kind of Bible we use in my denomination, in the Protestant Bible, which will be very different from what our Jewish friends use, and also from what our Catholic friends use, and also from what our Eastern Orthodox friends use as well. So the next section of books, we talked about Torah, or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books the last time. The next section of books is kind of referred to as the historical books, and that goes from Joshua all the way to Esther. Covers a period of time in the history of the Israelites from essentially the time they came in control of Canaan until the period of the Babylonian exile, when they were defeated and in captivity or exile of the Babylonian Empire. So now here's the key to this part, and this may be a little confusing. We call them the historical books because they do tell a history, but they were not written necessarily for a historical account, if that makes any sense to you at all. Not in the same way that modern history texts would have been written. We have to remember that the writers of these texts, and you can, when you study them, you can see it in their writing, had, for lack of a better word, a bias or an agenda. They were trying to tell a specific aspect of the relationship between God and humankind, and their particular people of humankind in that time. So they had a bias from a religious perspective, of course, seeing their nation, their people from a more positive standpoint, either as victims or as victors, or as God's chosen people over that of others. They might have had political biases in this as well, as wanting to lift up certain leaders as being greater than others. One great way to get into that is to study more in depth the story of David and Goliath, and how that may or may not be what you think it is entirely. Great story that teaches a valuable lesson, but also had an agenda about making David appear a certain way. David, who was a very, very complex character. So this is not to undo all that you've learned about it, but just to remind us all that as we read these, we must read them knowing that they are meant to tell a story about a specific set of people in a specific time by certain writers wanting all of that to look a certain way. Does not mean that these do not, in fact, it means very much so that they do describe a lot about the relationship between God and humanity and all of creation, really. But it does not necessarily mean that you could say to these, this specific event happened on this specific date, and this is exactly what was said. They were not written with that intent. People recorded things for different purposes at that time in human history than what we do now. And so one way to liken it would be if you were to talk about this past year and read a historian who works for the Republican Party's account of this last year, and a historian who works for the Democratic Party's account of this last year, you might find two very different stories written about the same exact year, which was just immediately occurring. Of course, I'm not endorsing either one. I'm just saying I think we can all understand and admit that we would read two very different stories about this past year. And that's the case in a similar way to some of these, that there may have been other perspectives to all of this. There are, at times, other ancient texts which support a lot of these historical events, so we tend to believe that they did happen in that time. But there's a lot of gleaning that you must do from this as you research that to know what did happen and what maybe happened at a different time or with some different characters. But the general sense is that these are considered a history of the nation of Israel from the time of the occupation or coming into power in Canaan until the time of the Babylonian exile. So that's the historical parts, again, from Joshua to Esther. If you were to open up your Catholic friend's Bible, it will not look the same. There's some other additional books there. Our Jewish friends have different names on it. Some orders are different. Some of the books, like we have 1st and 2nd Samuel, are combined in others. So it's not always the same, actually. So remember that when you're living out your faith life, that not everybody sees everything the same way, but God is good all the time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.